Good afternoon. Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and today I'm joined by Bill Morse, a native New Londoner who's very well known locally, but has recently published a book called Lost New London about what the city was like before redevelopment in the 1960s. And we're going to talk about the book and some of its relevance to the challenges the city is facing today, especially in regards to housing. So before you start with the slideshow, and we have a lot of pictures, would you like to say something about what motivated you to write this book?
Sure. First off, hello, Rana, and hello, everybody who's watching. Thank you for tuning in. What the catalyst was, I've always had an interest in old buildings. I like architecture, I like the materials, the craftsmanship, the charm that older construction had, whether it was commercial, mixed commercial, residential, or strictly residential. And so I've always liked small cities. I consider myself very lucky that my parents decided to raise me in New London. I was born at L&M Hospital. And from there, New London was a very good springboard in seeking other experiences in different localities, not only in the US, but also overseas, because New London is so connected by water, by air, by rail, by highway. Uh, and we're on a very busy corridor between Boston and New York. Both cities are, you could do a day trip in both. So that gave me a lot of exposure. And I was working on a building. Since I left school, I buy fixer uppers. I live in them, kind of like urban camping. And then I either sell them to the tenant upstairs or down below, or I sell them to another family. And I did the same thing when I decided to come back from the Bronx to New London in 1999, and 94 Golden Street popped up as available. A good friend, Peter, Peter told me, gave me a little background on the building. I knew by doing some research what it had been used for. It was a nightclub, Rafa Club, Tartar's Cafe, the Top Hat, and there was a hotel above, the Central Hotel. Anyway, one day, as we were working in crew on the first floor, a small, petite woman came in and introduced herself as Bess Oldershaw. She had a grocery bag of loose color slides that her brother had taken. This was his photographic collection of New London in downtown Main Street, East New London, because they lived on Amity Street up on the hill. And she says, "These are yours. I know you'll appreciate them because what you're doing with the old Williams Bakery, which is what it was built as in 1881. And my first experience with Access TV was showing slides, the color slides after I had put them in order, locating them by using a Sanborn fire insurance map from 1954. So that was my interest in what was along Main Street and in East New London, from State going all the way up to Hodges Square, the bridge. And something resonated, the density, the mixed use. And so I thought for today's program, we would look at the housing opportunities that were available in 1960, okay, and see how they disappeared and how I believe that's contributed to creating not just an affordable housing crisis, but also coupled with the closing of Norwich State Hospital, we've also helped. Well, I think we've inadvertently have contributed to homelessness. Many of the people who lived in these buildings, not many, but some of them, depending on the building, each building had a different character, were very close to being homeless. And we had cheap housing opportunities that, while they weren't problem free, they were a better solution than having a general shelter or in leaving people in the street especially during cold weather.
So you mentioned the Sanborn maps, and the first slide I think that I want to show is one that includes the Sanborn map of New London of 1954, coupled with a relatively recent one from 2005.
Yes, that's right, Rana. The one on the left with the brown showing buildings. The map on the left is from 2020. You can see the Central Vermont Pier on the left, the State Pier on the right. Had that been done today, you would see both those piers joined together through infill for the wind turbine construction project. And you could see that a number of streets are no longer there. If you jump from 2000 to 1954, the dates on the lower right-hand corner, where you see a grid of streets going from State all the way up to Hodges Square by the bridge, and then going east towards the river, covering the area that was called Winthrop Neck or East New London. And so that's the area. We're going to look at housing opportunities that were there in that redevelopment area in about 1960.
And this, a lot of that street grid, if you look at Hill Street, Shapley, Federal still does exist, but several of the streets don't exist, or they're sort of there, but other things are going on. So I'm going to, let's see, go down, and you're going to show a lot of photographs. You want to talk a little bit about George Oldershaw?
Yes, George Oldershaw was the brother of Bess Oldershaw. He worked at Pfizer. Anyone familiar with Eastern Point Road in Groton will recognize this location. The gentleman in white is George Oldershaw. Behind him is a tank farm for Hess. It's no longer Hess. I don't know what's happened with the property since I don't really follow what's going on over there on a regular basis. There's a train of tank cars to his right, or to his left, our right. And of course, the tankers the track was there to serve not just the Hess tank farm, but also Electric Boat. Pfizer, it would be to the left of him, where the manufacturing took place, south of that location, along the Thames River. So thank you, George, for taking these slides, because otherwise we would not have records of what these streetscapes, these neighborhoods, these blocks look like.
And I became familiar with them, I think about 25 years ago, around 2000, when Dale Plummer did a presentation in the basement of the Hygienic. I think it focused more on the Huntington Street area and not the entire neighborhood so much. But I was pretty new living in New London at that time, and it was, well, both fascinating and really disturbing to me to see that there were a lot of really amazing buildings that came down. So we'll walk through the neighborhoods a little.
Okay, we are going to start with the building that graces the cover of Lost New London, and that is the Neptune Building. The Neptune Building is called Beaux-Art because of the design. You see portholes at the top in the roof structure. That's because a company that owned a fish market on the other side of the parade, where South Water Street is, the fish market was looking to establish a fish market elsewhere. And so they bought what was the old yellow building, which was a large frame building that had hardware, paint, livery services for horses, etc., and also had an early tavern during the whaling period where the whalers would come in and drink rum. Rum was very popular because it came from the West Indies, and New London had built a lot of its wealth on trade with the West Indies, Barbados, Nevis. So anyway, this was built in 1899, and it was called the Neptune because they wanted a maritime connection with the name of the building since they were going to sell seafood there, hence the portals. Uh, they had a contest, and the contest winner, whose name was chosen, won $5. This was in 1899. Can you guess what the runner-up name for the Neptune building was? I'll give
No
you a clue.
idea.
I'll give you a clue. It was a disaster movie starring Gene Hackman.
Oh my gosh.
Disaster movie
I
starring Gene Hackman. Ernest Borgnine was in it.
Oh my gosh, I have no idea. Gene Hackman, all I can think of is the French Connection, but I
Yeah,
know that wouldn't be
that's
it.
that's an action, but this is a tragedy. It was called the Poseidon.
Oh
The
yeah.
Poseidon
I've
was
heard,
the runner-up for naming this building the Neptune.
yeah, he
It
was
was
the
two
god
or
of the
three.
sea.
Yeah, exactly. It Poseidon was maybe 3 or 4 votes short of being the name for this building, and the choice was made by the owners, and they had set up a committee of well-known people, local people at the time. So this was built in 1899. The fish market never located on the first floor. The first floor was the Steel Outfitters. It was a gentleman's clothing store, kind of upscale. And the top floor, where you see the dormers, that was a telephone exchange for Southern New England Telephone,
Oh wow.
talking 1900. And then the in between floors were the Neptune Hotel. Now, during the First World War, the Second World War, the Neptune Hotel was taken over by the Salvation Army, and the rooms were used to billet sailors and soldiers during both wars. So after that, the building unfortunately was the building wasn't empty. The hotel space it continued as a hotel. I know because they were every now and then someone's name would come up in the 50s, and their address would be the Neptune Hotel. But the retail was the strong part. You had an Army Navy store on the left. You had the Paramount restaurant about midsection, and then towards the end you had a barber shop and I believe a grocery store, kind of like a deli. Those were occupied until I'd say the mid '60s when they prepped the building for coming down. Uh, Redevelopment was in ownership of the title. I do not remember who the owner was at the time of changing of the guard, so to speak, and redevelopment took over the building and took it down in 1967.
Wow, it must have been
So
kind of traumatic to see such an impressive looking building in the middle of town come
yeah,
down.
but it's I think there's one important reason why it was not successful as a hotel in the 50s and the 60s. When I say successful, I mean uh, successful like the Crocker House or the Mohegan Hotel. Those were more upscale places. This Neptune building is on the north side of the parade. Uh, Union Station, the train station, is on the east side of the parade. Okay. North side is the Neptune building. And I think there was already a transition towards car travel. And you had people drawn into this idea of motels along the highway. In the 50s, we started working on interstate highways. And
Right.
so that meant a lot of these buildings, their initial purpose would be obsolete. I think the hotel status of the Neptune building was always kind of on shaky grounds. They tried to make office space out of it in 1950. That idea didn't go anywhere. Uh, and the traveling public, the travel practices had changed. So you did not have as many people getting off the train and looking for a place immediately to stay, although logically you would think that would be the case. But if they were going to, they would walk up State Street to either the Crocker House or to the Neptune, Mohegan Hotel. The Neptune really wasn't an option in most people's minds. But I'm looking at the building today. I see a good building for mixed use, commercial on the first floor, and then housing on the second, third, and in this case, the fourth floors. And
And we,
each of those, you could have 8 very nice high ceiling,
yeah.
maximum light, maximum sunlight apartments in that building if it were still there today. So
And there's
that's a housing option that's gone.
yeah, and downtown is still it's different from how it was functioned before as a transportation hub, but it still is kind of a transportation hub
Yes.
with Crosstown Ferry there as well and easy access from the highway, even though I guess, you know, these downtown places didn't all have big parking lots for people who drive in. So
Yeah, exactly. That was another detriment. The motels that were being built along I-95 and other major access roads, highways, they had plenty of parking. You did
yeah,
not have to worry about parking. You didn't have to worry about something being taken from your car. That would have been an issue even in the 50s and in the early 60s. So that put the Neptune building as a hotel at a disadvantage with its newer competition. And the competition stemmed from people going to cars and going more and more into a suburban lifestyle and leaving behind an urban lifestyle.
yeah.
So
Hmm.
anyway, that's one example of a certain type of housing uh,
Yeah.
that was removed through redevelopment and not replaced.
Okay, let's keep going up the street then. Uh,
Now we're looking at 2 buildings that are located between the Neptune building on the left and the baggage room of the train station on the right. The building on the left, the brick building, probably goes back to the 1840s. If you see the 2 high walls with a parapet on either side of that building, 3-story building, you see how there's a parapet on the left and one on the right?
yeah.
Those were firewalls to protect that building from uh, structure fires nearby or a neighboring building that was framed and therefore not fireproof. This was touted as a fireproof building, I'm sure, when it was built in the 1840s. This was whaling era money that built this bus depot building. But why is it there? Because you've got 2 floors above the bus depot, New London Terminal, it's called, and the lunchroom. There was a lunchroom connected with the bus depot that were rooms, single room occupancy. Some of the rooms all had, they had, each floor had a bathroom with a shower that was shared with everybody else on the floor. That's just the way housing was, or that was the way accommodations were 100, 150 years ago. Unless it was a luxury apartment or a luxury hotel room, lodging, you shared the bathroom with everybody else on that floor. The shower, bathtub, etc., toilet. That was still an option in this building up until I'd say the 50s. And then again, there was the same fate as the Neptune building. People did not go there unless perhaps they were a sailor, they were, having a night out. And so they would stay with a couple of their shipmates in one of those rooms. This was not family accommodations. This was more single guys. And in some cases, there was some prostitution, but that was pretty much under the okay of the owner. And the owner in this case ran a very reputable building, both on the first floor where the bus depot was. This was a Henry Savin building, Henry Savin bus lines. And uh, evidently, there was not enough money in renting out the rooms or keeping them up to date as far as making them comfortable places to stay. Now, on the other hand, in the other building on the right, the white building, it's a little smaller, like this little brother of the one on the left. That was Mr. Loziotis. And there was the Manhattan restaurant, which was in the Loziotis family. That rented rooms at the time of this picture, which was 1961. They were still renting rooms because if you look at the doorway there's two doorways. The one on the right, if you zoom in on this picture, goes to the Manhattan restaurant, and you see the orange neon sign lit in the picture window. The door on the left goes upstairs, and the sign was still there, rooms for rent. This was 1961. Actually, I have a picture of these two buildings in 1964. I chose this one because it's a color shot. In 64, it's a black and white picture from a City of New London survey. And there's a little sign that says rooms for rent, although it doesn't look like, if you look at the windows, it's not like you've got flowers on the windowsill and nice drapery or curtains to liven up the window area. Very rudimentary. And again, this was for people without a lot of money that might stay a night or two after a night out, or other short-term stays.
But now we are seeing that there are people again in our society who might be interested in this kind of room, especially as weather gets colder.
Well, yes, and I would love to see some type of accommodation connected with travel by train, Amtrak. There should be a connection between Union
Right.
Station and accommodations. Union Station itself is not fully is not fully in use.
Right.
The upper floors, I think, are still vacant, even though there were occupants, I think, in the late 70s and 80s. But anyway, those two buildings, single room occupancy, one person or perhaps two people, a bathroom per each floor, and that's it. Very simple accommodations and very affordable. So let's move on.
Let's.
Now, this is the beginning of North Bank Street. Used to be called Bradley Street. Bradley was he was a mariner. He was actually a ship captain in the 1600s, and he had a homestead towards the end of Bradley Street, and so that's why the street carries his name, Peter Bradley, I believe. Now, why are we looking at this corner? Well, first off, this is where, as I said, North Bank Street or Bradley Street begins. On the right-hand side of the picture, you can barely see the corner of the Neptune building. We're in the shadow of the Neptune building, just north. Now, there's interesting stories on this corner building, but I'm going to leave that for people to read about in the book Lost New London. Talking about housing accommodations, I want to talk about that second building with the barber shop. You see the little short striped barber pole in front of the display window, and then you have two windows, the second and third floor. There was a barber by the name of Wolf Barnett that came over from England in the 20s. And I don't know if I'm reading a book by, I was given, what's his name? He wrote I'm blanking on his name, and the book isn't nearby. Anyway, English writer from the 1830s, 1820s, 1810s. He wrote Charles Dickens. Thank you, Charles Dickens. I'm reading a Charles Dickens novel, and in the novel, there's a locksmith who has an apprentice, and the apprentice lives with the family. Well, this was very English. You, or perhaps other countries as well. But if you were an apprentice, you would go live with the family of your master and you would learn the trade. Not you would not only learn the trade, but you would actually learn something about living in a household that was not your own. Well, Wolf bought this building in 1920, I think it was 25 or 26, and he started bringing in apprentice barbers. Many of them were Italian. And so he had his barbershop where his apprentices would learn the trade. It was called Wolf's Barbershop. The Wolf family lived on the second floor, and the apprentices, sometimes there was just one, sometimes there were two. Generally, there were two apprentices at a time. They lived on the top floor. So I thought that's a pretty good arrangement. You live above your business, and your employees live above you. So your employees as apprentices, obviously, after 2 years, they're going to move on, either work for somebody else or open up their own barbershop. So that's why we have this picture of uh, number nine North Bank Street, which is the barbershop address, and number 11, which is the address of the two apartments above. So okay, now we're moving up North Bank Street. We're on the west side of North Bank Street. So if you're on the west side of North Bank Street, all the buildings on the west side here butt up against the backs of the buildings on Main Street. Now, interesting story here. Again, there's more about these two buildings in Lost New London, but I want to look at the three-story brick building. This picture was taken in '59 before both buildings were to be taken down for an expansion of the day papers print operation. If you look very closely, you'll see there's a vertical neon sign that has the Lee emblem, Lee, Lee being Lee Jeans. And this is where Marcus and Company, Hiram Marcus, opened up his men's clothing store in 1927. No, correction. He opened it up in 1921. The Wilinski family took over the business from Hiram Marcus, H. Marcus, and they ran this until they were forced to close in 1959 because of the expansion, and the day was buying up both properties. The Wilinskis owned both properties, and they moved to Bank Street, Lower Bank Street, 21 Bank Street. After 1959 was the location of Marcus Jeans. So anyway, you see two floors above Marcus Jeans. The second floor and, when need be, the third floor, those were known as Dart Hall. These were halls. These were meeting place locations. And perhaps one of the more famous speakers to visit this hall in 1848 was Frederick Douglass, who gave speeches on why Connecticut should outlaw slavery. 1848, early 1848, slavery was still okay on the books in Connecticut. The other 5 New England states had already banned the practice of slavery. Connecticut only banned the practice of slavery 3 months after Frederick Douglass made his weekend of speeches here at Dart Hall. Now, there's more about this in the book, but I want to move a little quickly. You come up to 1925. Now, past the brick building where Marcus was a chapel. It was called the Bradley Mission for Bradley Street. There was a gentleman who made money off the stock exchange off of Wall Street. We were lucky enough to have him live in the Pequot colony. His name was Billings P. Leonard, or BP Leonard. And he gave money to the chapel. He was on the board of directors. Wouldn't you know, in 1925, the day paper was having its first expansion. 59 was expansion number 2. Expansion number 1 was 1925. And so they bought the BP mission, BP Leonard mission. I think it was BP Leonard in the early 20s. They changed names because of his generosity. Anyway, they took down the BP Leonard mission. So where is BP Leonard going to go for their social work, their settlement house programs? It was a settlement house. Get newcomers acclimated to New London, help them find housing, help them find a job, help them find childcare if necessary, that sort of thing. So the chapel came down, the day expanded. The men's shelter part of the services moved to this location, the second floor. So the second floor from 1925 to the 40s was a men's shelter. It was actually used to house defense plant workers arriving to work at Electric Boat and other places, but couldn't find housing. They could stay in this shelter until they found more permanent housing while they worked either at Electric Boat or some other defense plant industry, because we were at war. And anyway, so let's go to the next one.
Oh, I don't know.
By the way, just to round out the story, the men's shelter was established there above Marcus Jeans, or Lee Jeans. The family programs went to the BP Leonard House, which was originally the Lawrence Villa, built in 1850. And the BP Leonard House stayed in place as a settlement house for the family side of the services till 1967, when it was torn down by redevelopment. The last years of that building's use were as a field office for redevelopment. And then redevelopment took it down so that we would have this clean slate of empty property for future development.
And BP Learned has changed locations quite a bit in New London over the, well,
it went to Shaw Street after, it went to Shaw Street in 67, 68, because the Main Street location was taken and was going to be demolished within a year.
Okay, let's go back to the pictures here.
So if you step across the street, leave the Marcus Jeans, that 3-story building, the Dart Hall. An advantage of having the men's shelter there on the second floor of that building was across the street, you had the police station. Police station is that beautiful facade where you see the different stonework, brickwork. You have that oval emblem of the city of New London. The seal of the city of New London was carved in marble, I believe, and placed in the gable of that building behind where the gentleman is walking on the sidewalk. That's the police headquarters. From about 1925 to 1950. 1950, the police, roughly at that time, moved from this location on Bradley Street to the former Stanton School on Union Street. That Union Street building was not taken down because the police department had moved there. And now it's different city offices, now that the police have another location. Now, so the police kind of kept an eye on the shelter. And even though there was a gentleman interestingly enough, in charge of the shelter, who had a walking problem, but where he had a physical limitation, he made up for that in his bearing and his commitment to having a well-run settlement, a well-run shelter to keep men from freezing to death outdoors, but without any nonsense. I think maybe 3 or 4 times he needed to bring the cops over, and by the time the cops came there, he had settled the issue. So in the book, I have the gentleman's name, but you have some people that were really pillars and really performed services uh, in helping the people that were most vulnerable in this part of New London. Now, interesting story, the building on the right. Again, this is a mixed use property. You had a laundry on the first floor and you had two apartments above. You can see the shuttered windows. Mm-hmm. Mixed use. You had the Chinese family running this laundry, living upstairs, renting one of the apartments to help pay the mortgage, and then doing their cooking, etc., in the back of the laundromat. So again, you had your business, you had your own residence, and you had a rental that could help you pay the mortgage on the property. The gentleman who ran this laundry, his name was Sam Wing Sing. Sam Wing Sing. And he learned the trade from a gentleman that had a laundry in Wolf Barnett's barbershop. The first Chinese laundry in New London was at Wolf Barnett's barbershop in 1880, 1875 to 1881. A gentleman, the first Chinese businessman that is recognized by record, opened up a Chinese laundromat there at Wolf's location, and he trained this Sam Wing Sing to take over the laundry business. And by 1900, Sam had three laundry services in New London. One was next to the Dutch Tavern on Green Street. This one here, and then I believe he also had a laundromat on Golden Street. Not Golden Street, but I want to say Main Street. Very industrious young man. But anyway, that building went through a couple of different usages, and unfortunately, for one reason or another, it was taken down for parking. Before redevelopment, you had a lot of holes in the streetscape. The holes were there to accommodate people parking. By 1960, North Bank Street was not solid with buildings. It was like a row of teeth, and you have every third or fourth tooth missing. So you had vacant lots where buildings were, and those lots were vacant to accommodate people parking their cars.
Even though a lot of the people using them would not necessarily be parking, because it seems to me that this location of a laundry is really important for the people who live there in settlement houses and boarding house situations.
Yes, that's true. And that's why there was a proliferation of Chinese laundries in the teens, the 20s, and the 30s. I would say in the Main Street area, there were probably 4 or 5. So let's go further up North Bank Street. Now, this is another example of mixed use. You have a business in the front at the sidewalk level, and you have the family living upstairs or living in back. This is interesting. This is the corner of John Street, which is going down towards the right, and North Bank Street, which is going up towards the left. If you look at the back of this was a former grocery store and run by the same family for 20, 30 years. The family lived on the second floor, and in the back, they had an addition built with a garage in the basement level, and then like 2 sunrooms above it. That was a later addition. I'm going to say that that garage was not made for horses. It was made for cars. So already there was some construction of garage space for these cars or naturally for these businesses that would need a truck for delivery purposes. Just as an aside, that house to the down the street behind the one on the corner, that office or that storefront was New London News. New London News started on John Street. The owners, I'm sure, lived above. Uh, but what happens is after the business does well, the owner actually wants to separate from the business, which I imagine is normal. It's if there are opportunities and the space is used for storage as opposed to residential because of the lack of space otherwise. So again, mixed use, Whaling Arab house, grocery store, and family living above. Now, this is the building on the left, one level building. If you look if you focus in on the door, there's a saw above the entry door, and it says tool sharpening. This was a tool rental and a tool sharpening, a blade sharpening business that was handed from one neighbor to another. Both men lived on North Bank Street. One opened this business in the 40s, stopped the business or left the business, and his friend took over. And this picture was taken, again, this is a black and white. All these black and white pictures are City of New London survey pictures from 1964. The building on the corner, the former grocery store, is empty. There's a sign in the window saying store fixtures for sale. This is because the building's going to be coming down within a couple of months. And the business, the sharpening business, I believe may still be in business by as late as 64 because the display windows have different examples of woodwork that are made with different saws. So you have decorations, kitchen decorations that are come out of woodcraft. In other words, they're carved with different types of saws as examples, of what the tools can do. That once they're sharp, or once they can be rented. So this was a tool rental business as well as a sharpening. But again, these are small, one person, maybe one employee, one person who's a business owner, one employee, 1, 2, 3 people at the max, small businesses that can afford these little storefront, lower rents, and just deal with one landlord that probably lives on the street, as opposed to a space in a strip mall where it's a corporate, realty corporation that owns the property and really has no real local ties, which seems to be the case nowadays when you're looking at renting space, a storefront space in a strip mall. This to me seems a much more accessible, affordable way of not only living, but starting a business in your residential space, under the same roof, I mean to say. Obviously, you should delineate your workspace from your living space. But these are 2 good examples of mixed use, and especially advantageous for people who have a small business and want a bricks and mortar sidewalk presence. This is another mixed use. This is Scregan's. This is like the brother of the Dutch Tavern. Very similar type of business. A tavern. The people who own the tavern live on the 2nd floor. The Scregan's. The son was a Russian teacher at New London High School in the early 50s. So this was open up until the end, 1967. I think this was the last building in its immediate vicinity that was allowed to stay open. And as everything else around it was torn down, the Scregan's looked like it was on the surface of the moon. But again, you have the idea of owners' family living above their business. And that helped for convenience, but it also helped for security because they did have trouble with people breaking in. That's not a recent phenomena. We've always had, you look at police logs or police reports in the paper, there have always been issues with break ins, and it helps to have the people living under the same roof as their business.
And this was the norm, I think, in a lot of cities. When I was a kid in Philadelphia in the 60s, I know that my grandparents had a bakery that they lived behind. And even the dentist I went to, lived above the building where he was doing his dentistry.
Well, I'll throw this into you and to join you on that thought, Rana. It's Carla. Carla lived in Philadelphia when we met. I was living in Philadelphia. I rehabbed a row house, and during that process, met Carla. And by her house in the South Philly area, south of the Italian market on Dickinson, Ferenghelli's was a bakery, and the family lived above the bakery. And that was very common in South Philadelphia. That was common at one time in West Philadelphia, North Philadelphia. You lived above or behind your business for convenience, but also for security. Also, they put a lot of hours in. You're not going to put a lot of hours in at your job if you own it, and then you're going to drive an hour and a half home.
Right.
It didn't, people do it now, but it doesn't have to be that way. So let's go to the slide. We're going to talk about rooming houses. Rooming houses where you go and you rent rooms, sometimes by the week, sometimes by the month. And you can rent the room. You share, again, a common bathroom on that floor, but you could also get your board, which is your meals included. A lot of boarding houses were in people's homes that were originally large family homes, but later on were kind of sectioned off when the large families no longer lived in these houses. Many of these houses, these are villas, were sectioned off into private rooms, obviously with locking doors to ensure privacy, and then a common bathroom on each floor. Uh, sometimes, sometimes it doesn't always work. It depends on the person who's running the house, the family. Very often, it's the mother of the family that runs the boarding house. The father is still working, maybe works at Electric Boat, the Sound Lab, someplace like that, wherever. This is an example of a boarding house further up on North Bank Street. We're on the last block of North Bank Street. Behind us, we're looking north. Behind us is Douglas Street. In front of us, we're looking down North Bank Street, and North Bank Street ends at Federal Street. Okay? And you see a building that's got red asphalt shingling on it with green trim on the left, and you see a brown dormer and a gable. All right, that's a rooming house. In this rooming house underlined the potential difficulties of not having enough inspectors or enforcement of housing code, enforcement of health codes. The issue with this boarding house was you had single room occupancy, you had a shared bathroom, which is fine, but there wasn't adequate heat in the rooms. And so the occupants, most of the occupants, 90% of them were older gentlemen who enjoyed drinking. And so it would be cold at night. not enough heat. So they would bring their own space heaters. We're talking the early 50s, late 40s. Space heaters were fueled before electric. Before you had electric heaters, you had kerosene, propane, some type of fuel. And when the fuel burns and lights up the mantle in a lantern, for example, or lights up the radiant heat coming off of the elements, then that burns up, the flame burns up oxygen. Many times these windows were taped shut. There was no circulation of fresh air. Uh, Someone would come in inebriated into their room, fall asleep, and obviously the heater was left on. The heater all the time burning up the oxygen. People asphyxiated. In other words, they didn't have enough oxygen and they died. This happened 4 times in the early 50s in this one location. I believe after, if I remember the article correctly, because the day was very good in following this story up, 2 gentlemen died over a period of 2 years. The third year, a third gentleman died. The issue came before city council, and the city council, I believe eventually there was a push towards a housing code that would be enforced and more strict regulations on portable space heaters so that you would not have a fueled space heater, fueled so that there was a flame that was burning up the available oxygen in the closed off sealed space. But 4 people, unfortunately, died during this awareness period of the problem in this particular boarding house. And it wasn't an absentee landlord. The landlord lived upstairs on the 3rd floor. His tenants or his boarders lived on the 1st and 2nd floor. Ironically, the landlord fell down the stairs, coming down from his apartment to the front door, and died from his fall down the stairs. Shortly after that, we're talking around 1955, the city condemned the building. Now, there was discussion, why don't we have circulating air? Just put holes through the walls and put vent covers over these holes. The landlord did that, but the noises from the neighbors would bother the resident, and then the resident would take newspaper and block up the hole. So you don't have the circulation of fresh air anymore. Ideally, you would have had a new heating plant put into the building. I don't know, perhaps knowledge that the redevelopment was going to eventually take down the building. Maybe that, I'm sure that was the case with many landlords believing that, why should I invest more money in this building? Why should I follow a housing code, building code, or a health code when my property is going to be taken down and I'm going to have trouble? People know this, and they're not going to want to live here.
Yeah.
Unless, it's this place or out on the street. And for the gentlemen that were living in this house, the other choice was being out on the street.
Yeah.
So there was an issue, and it points to a larger issue that, again, as early as 1958, we had a redevelopment agency that was responsible for putting in the Golden Street parking lot. That was all buildings. That was apartment houses and businesses. From Golden Street to Pearl Street to Tilley Street, that was all filled in with buildings, very densely populated. Redevelopment agency, I believe, this is how it had its first assignment in the mid-50s, took all that down, and we now have the open lot or surface parking, they call it, from Golden Street all the way down to Tilley. All right, so People knew that there was a redevelopment agency. They knew that they were looking for federal money to take down this entire Winthrop Cove area, Main Street, Winthrop Cove area, and bring in new development that would pay more taxes. So I'd say the attitude from 56, 57 on was no investment.
So it became
No,
kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that
exactly.
it was a
Exactly.
downtrodden neighborhood.
And actually, when you look at these pictures, the ones that are in the book, unfortunately, they're all black and white, but that's the format of the book. Uh, yeah, I was surprised how many businesses were still there a year before they were taken down. A lot of some of the businesses got extensions. This is interesting. The businesses or the homeowners, they got extensions. They sold their property to redevelopment and then they paid rent to redevelopment.
Wow.
So I have a business or I have an apartment house, I have a duplex, and yeah, okay, you win. Give me your award of $7,000, and or if I had a business, let's say I had a dry cleaning business, or I had a bowling alley, which was the case on Main Street. Uh, Let me stay beyond the seizure of my property, beyond you getting the deed to my property, you being the redevelopment agency. And the agency said, well, that's fine. We don't need to take your building down for another 6 months, but you're going to have to pay us rent. So businesses and homeowners, mostly businesses, but also some homeowners, wound up paying rent to redevelopment agencies so that they could stay in their property until they were able to move to another location.
Oh, wow. So owners became renters. I guess in the interest of time, we should keep on
Yeah, let's go
going
on.
in the
I don't.
neighborhood.
Yeah, now this here, we're on Main Street, and we're looking at BP Leonard House on the right with a nice lawn and the tree in the corner of the lawn. You see, we're looking, the road is Main Street. You see a kind of a nice a Victorian lamp post on the left. You see the First Congregational Church, the steeple that unfortunately is also part of Lost New London now. Below that brick building is the Polish Club. Now, the boarding house is on the right, number 30 Federal Street. You can see, even from this picture, that it's well maintained, um, owner occupied, obviously. All these boarding houses were owner occupied. Uh, Room and board. I When I do research on a house, I go by the address. So I started looking up 30 Federal Street, and I came across three different occasions when people, a man and a woman living in this boarding house who did not know each other initially when they first arrived, wound up not only getting to know each other, but falling in love and announcing their intention of marriage to the town clerk. Now, so in other words, Sheila and I plan on getting married in 4 months. Here is our intention of marriage so that when we do get married, we'll have the certificate for a legal marriage drawn up. Okay. Well, it was in the paper not only who is going to be married, Bill Morse and Carla Ligori, let's say, but our age, our occupation, and where we lived. And on three different occasions, the couples, both the man and the wife, lived at the same address, 30 Federal Street. And in some cases, they not only live in the same address, but they work at the same, they work for the same employer. I can tell you there's a couple that worked in dry cleaning and they met in a boarding house. They worked for Crown Cleaners, which is just across the street the northeast corner of Federal and Main Street. And it was kind of cool that this couple had their universe in a 2 or 3 square block area, and they probably didn't even have a car. They didn't need a car. They lived together. They got to know each other under this one roof. And in some cases, they even worked together. So, again, it's all networking. They may have worked together first and then wound up in the same boarding house, or they started in the same boarding house and wound up later working for the same employer, or some other arrangement. So this is an example of a boarding house that works, that meets building code regulations, housing code regulations, sanitation or health code regulations. So this is a case for boarding houses.
And even by today's standards, the neighborhood is beautiful looking.
Yes, this is the beginning of Federal Street. I think Federal Street was the classiest street in this area of redevelopment. I mean, it's not a put down. I mean, when I say classy, I mean this is where the villas were. You had a Henkel Villa, you had the Minor Villa, the Lawrence Villa on the corner. You had a couple of villas, and this house here was actually the I don't know if you would call it a parsonage, but it's the church, St. James Church house. And you can see it was 2 families at one time. It's located right across from Meridian Street. And in the back was an 8-stall garage for parking cars. So you had a driveway, you had the garage in the back, you had a front lawn. It's a nice looking property, and maybe it could remain as a duplex for 2 larger families. One homeowner, the other the mortgage payer, the tenant, or it could be 4 apartments. But there was when people say slum, this is not a slum building. This was maintained by an owner-occupant. So let's move further down. We're moving along Federal Street, going towards Huntington. Now, this building here was also a villa. This was built with whaling money. The Alderson Prentice Funeral Home. I'd say 80% of the people that died in this area went through the portal or this carriageway of Alderson Prentice on their way to their next plane of existence. This is across the street from St. James Church. That corner that you see there, the lower curve of the sidewalk with the hedge on the left, that's curving into Meridian Street. So the pretty beige framed building we saw, that was 65. We're going towards Huntington Street, so the numbers increase. This is 75. And I think we talked about this yesterday in the back. And again, people can see this building, this magnificent stable house made of brick with French-style turrets, bay windows, beautiful structure. That was built as a stable house for a carriage house by the original owners. And it was used by the funeral home, for coffin storage and also to store their hearses. Okay. But you have to buy the book to see what that carriage house looked like. The back of it ran along, the back of the rear of the carriage house went along Shapley Street. So let's go to number 85. Mm-hmm. Last example. All right. That fence is at the corner of the church. St. James Church. So we're standing on the sidewalk looking north. We're standing in front of the church looking north along Huntington. This is Federal Street, and Huntington is out of picture on the left. This is another whaling era mansion that was built. And it kind of looks like it would be a cool frat house or say a sorority because it has that look and that feel for it. If this were a college town, oh wait, New London is a college town,
Yeah.
but it doesn't help us here.
No.
It
I,
didn't keep
I,
this from being demolished.
yeah.
And I believe that there were 4 apartments there. You may have had a couple of, what is the word? Mansard apartments up there where you see the
Oh,
smaller
yeah.
windows. So that was an apartment house. Very often, a doctor's office would be on the first floor. And we discussed this also yesterday. We changed code, the zoning code in the 70s, and it allowed professional people and it allowed their offices, doctors, medical professions, law professions, lawyers, to locate in formerly residential, solid residential areas like R1, R2, where before they were confined to downtown. And so you had an office helping to pay the rent on the first floor, and then you had tenants on the second floor. So this again is another housing arrangement that could work as an example of mixed use and lessen our need to drive everywhere because you would have density and people could walk maybe 2 or 3 blocks. All right, so next stage is single family home ownership. I call these 3 houses the Shapley princesses. These are Victorian, kind of Queen Anne style cottages
Oh,
that
beautiful.
lined the north side of Shapley Street. We're down towards, we're about halfway up the hill. Shapley and Hill Streets and Richard Streets are very steep. So we're about halfway up the hill and we're headed towards Huntington Street. And on our right, the north side, we see these houses. These were single family occupancy houses. So people own these houses. Again, my my concern with how redevelopment was done was as far as housing were concerned, we only had the rental option. There was no home ownership option under redevelopment. There was no rehab your older house option under redevelopment. The money through the federal government, because federal government gave New London $9 million, New London taxpayers came up with the additional million to meet the $10 million budget for this program. There was just rental housing. And I think people initially thought there would be luxury housing, middle income housing that you could own, like condominiums. None of that happened. It was moderate and low income, which is what we wound up with. So, no home ownership, no option to rehab an older property with character or to rehab an entire streetscape. Everything had to be brand new. And the money, the subsidy money was there just for the lower income and moderate income.
Do
So
you
it was
happen
a
to
bait and switch. I'll say it. It was a bait and switch. The
do you
people
happen to know
voted
what
for it.
our home ownership rate was in New London prior to redevelopment? Because we know it's low now.
I'm going to say it was 37%.
Okay.
And that's a low ball figure. It could be higher than 37. It could be 42%. But as you've correctly stated, Rana, that percentage keeps going down because
Yeah.
they're apartments. You pay a rent. They're not condos. You can't even buy your apartment. You can't buy a house like this, at least not affordably. When these houses were taken down, the owners got maybe $8,000 for them. Now, $8,000 was a lot of money, but the range went from $6,000 to $8,000 for a house. $6,000 if the house was in poor condition, $8,000 if it was one of these, which obviously was kept in good shape. All right, let's move on. So that's home ownership option of housing that disappeared in this area. So we need to, the next picture is the YWCA.
Wait, was this one the YWCA?
Keep going forward. We're going
Okay,
back.
I'll keep going.
Oh, I'm
No?
sorry. Richard Street, more home ownership
Okay,
options.
let's do a little bit of Richard Street.
Yeah, Richard Street. Again, a third street. You had Chapley Hill and Richard Streets that joined Main Street at the bottom of the hill with Huntington at the top. Now, I like this picture because it shows some cool cars, one or two. I love I think it's a T-Bird. I'm not sure. I could be wrong. Also, the colors of the houses. Why don't we go to the one before, the south side of Richard Street?
Even a better
There's that
car picture.
Got a better car picture. It looks like a T-Bird to me, but there should be a porthole in the top on the back seat. So anyway, we're looking from Main Street, looking up towards Buckley School, which is right up there behind that tree. That's Buckley School. That's along Huntington Street. Huntington Street is along the top there, running north to south. These streets run east and west. And these are two-family houses where the homeowner lived on one floor and a tenant family lived on the second floor. You see that one there, I believe that's number 12, with a porch and then a front porch on the second floor. A few houses like that. You had mixed use here. If you look up past the blue car, you see a brick building with a kind of a white side sticking out because of the sun reflection, but it's yellow brick in the front. The Massets lived there, and it was a single family house, but you have maybe two or three different family subsets within the general family, kind of like a family compound. Well, this was for that branch of the Masset family, a family compound. And they had a shirt making business in a little factory in the backyard. And it was also masonry construction. This house was built about 1840. They moved in the 40s to the house. And after World War II, around 1947, 48, they built a little shirt making factory in the back.
Wow.
Of course, 20 years later, this would all have to be torn down. But you had a mixture of people living on the property and having a separate subdivision, so to speak. It's the same property parameter, but they have a business, a separate business in an outbuilding for their shirt manufacturing. And they made funeral shirts because it's a custom among Lebanese families to have a burial shirt for the person who's going to take their journey to the next level, the next plateau of existence. So Richard Street, a pretty good example of middle class with rental options.
And a person, even though it looks as though people were car owners, there was a lot in everyday life that you could just walk to.
Yes, there was. This side of the street, again, a mixture. Kind of reminds me of Stewart Street or Stewart Avenue, from Montauk down to Shaw. This reminds me of what used to be Frenchie's Barbershop on Stewart Street. That, I'm going to point my finger and say that little brick building in the foreground on the right looks like a barbershop, but it was probably something else. But again, you had a mixture. You had residential and business on the same block. So anyway, now we're at the YMCA, an organization that, while not the same as a settlement house, it offered support services. You had the Young Men's Christian Association. You had the Young Men's Hebrew Association. We did have one here in New London on Main Street that some people may remember hearing of, a YMHA, a YMCA. This was a YWCA, Young Women's Christian Association. And this was I'm going to say that this was a single family house at one time, a mansion that was converted to a YWCA, because the YWCA initially was in not the Lawrence Villa on Main Street at Federal, where BP Leonard later relocated, but the minor villa, which was taken down in '53 to make a playground space for BP Leonard. There were two identical villas there. The minor villa, which was later taken down, that had nonprofit services officed there. And then you had the other was the Lawrence. Both were whaling families, the Miners and the Lawrences. And the Lawrences, that house became BP Leonard in '25. So the YWCA moved from Main Street to Church Street, which is now Governor Winthrop Boulevard. And to have an idea of where this YWCA was located, if you go down Huntington Street, you go past the back of the Guard, you'll see a parking lot for Biles McDougall Funeral Home, Biles Memorial Funeral Home. It's on the right. It's opposite, kind of like diagonally across from Tony D's, okay, under the California Fruit Store, or Fiddleheads, I should say. Anyway, the parking lot for Biles McDougall Funeral Home, that parking lot is where the YWCA stood. Mm. So what they did was they decided, the redevelopment agency, with council's approval, decided to widen Church Street so that there were actually 4 lanes instead of 2. Well, if you're going to widen Church Street, that means you're going to have to tear everything down on far side. Well, that's what happened to a number of businesses and the YWCA. Perfectly functional building that offered accommodations for women that were involved in their programs or visiting. So there was another housing opportunity there that has disappeared through a public service organization such as the YWCA. There was even talk of taking the YMCA too, but fortunately that did not pan out, and the YMCA was spared demolition. Okay, our last view of what was is Lower Main Street. Again, we're talking mixed use. You don't really need to run an entire block. You can run 30 feet of one block, and then your neighbor runs 30 feet, the next 30 feet. You could have 30 to 40 feet, 40-foot fronts, storefronts at the sidewalk level, and then have apartments above or offices above, dentists, doctors, lawyers. So, starting with the left, we have the Red Rose Restaurant, which was 14 Main Street. Shout out to my mother and father because their first date was in 1947, and my father took my mother to the Red Rose Restaurant for some Chinese food. So, Red Rose Restaurant, that's a very cool neon sign. And you see neon signs, you can see the lighting that must have taken place, to attract people's attention when they drove by in either direction on Main Street. The next, and there was there's an apartment above the Red Rose Restaurant. The next business was Gora's Fruit and Vegetable. There probably was storage or some type of office space, judging by the window situation above the awning. And then beyond that, there was Solomon Stationery, apartments above that. You had Kaplan's Travel, apartments above that. And you had the Stork Shop, which closed 1 year before all of this was taken down.
Mm.
Laura's closed 1 year before this was taken down. These businesses wanted to stay. None of these businesses, Hudson Shop was also there. You see kind of at a going off to the right, a vertical sign that said Hudson's. So this was this was kind of like you had State Street, which was very elegant, okay, and then you had more of another tier of smaller businesses that were equally important that provided travel services, restaurant, fruit and vegetable, dry goods, or like a little department store, which was the case with Hudson's, and then offices and living spaces above. Notice that Main Street was two-way, and even with the two-way travel, you still had parking on either side. You had to have some parking because you had truck deliveries, but you also had street parking.
And
And
it looks like it was very busy.
yeah, this picture was taken in 61, 1 year before the referendum, whereby voters approved going ahead with the Winthrop Cove Urban Renewal Project, which is kind of a little misleading because the area of demolition started at Bank Street. No, started the level of backup. The level of demolition started at State Street,
Right.
went all the way to Hodges Square under the bridge.
And the only building left of the ones in this picture are the bank building right on the right-hand side.
Exactly. You can see the columns and then the day paper, which is out of picture to the right.
Yeah.
But again, look at the fancy street lighting, that Victorian, the fancy bracket,
Yeah.
and then the light itself. It had you still had evidence of art and function in harmony. Today, we seem to just have function and convenience of size and weight. We don't worry about its appearance. We don't worry about art. We don't worry about the grace that an object can have, even as common as the grace of a street lamp.
Well, and I did put together this one almost last slide that showed that period of time between 1950 and 1960 was a period of a lot of growth in New London. So to me, it seems kind of strange that when a city is kind of reaching its peak, that's when we vote to change everything.
Well, we voted to suburbanize New London. We voted to suburbanize, to de-densify New London. And it was a program of managed decline. And it was, in my opinion, it was going in the wrong direction. You always plan for growth. You don't plan for a decline, because then you bypass a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, there was a big population loss in the 30 years since that. Well, we have about 3 minutes left, even though I've made this a long show. But my question to you is, looking at all of this that was going on in New London's past, what can we learn for how to develop New London into the future? We're now starting to work on the plan of conservation and development for the next 10 years. So what can this tell us about what we should do thinking about the next 10 years?
Well, as far as the development of a piece of property, the emphasis should be on mixed use. In other words, let's say you have a bank that wants to open a branch in your town. All right, like the Dime Bank, which opened on Bank Street in what was the Shaw's Cove urban renewal area. That bank can only be built if there are apartments above. You need to relook at zoning and get away from everything being car related or car dependent. In other words, you have this one level building, the M&T Bank, let's say, or a dime bank, and it's surrounded by a parking lot. No, first you bring back street parking, you slow down the traffic like they've done on Lower Bank Street. You don't have a little hut of a building as your bank. You have it as part of a 3-story building, at very minimum, a 2-story building with apartments above. All right. Mixed use, commercial and residential. You don't have a parking lot around it. What do you have around it? More buildings. You build up the density. What's good about that is you have people, you accommodate people of different income levels. Uh, that was the beauty of that area. It was developed over 200 years, okay? So 200 years, you have a mixture of commercial, industrial, and residential. We need to somewhat copy that where we can, obviously with um, strictly enforced housing codes, health codes, building codes, inspectors. But let's bring back the boarding houses that offer accommodation and food on a weekly basis and a little sense of family, like at 30 Federal Street. Let's bring back owner occupied duplexes. Okay. You can put those on Bank Street, put them in row house format. Mm-hmm. But this idea of a strip mall with just a couple of businesses, nothing on top, a large parking lot in front and to the side, that is not going to be the way of the future. The way of the future is going to be a movement back towards density, back to a diversity of income, back to a diversity of businesses. Not everything is going to be done on a little screen. There's still going to be need for face-to-face contact between people. And I think younger people do not want to depend on a car like their parents did. I see that changing. They see the constant usage of cars as alienating because it's not the same experience as walking down the street, smiling at somebody, or stepping aside for some lady that has a child in a mother that has a child in a baby carriage, that sort of thing. Those kinds of experiences. We have people now growing up in areas, cul-de-sac, the subdivision areas that never have a sidewalk experience like that. They are constantly under motion with a car, and whether it's an electric car or a gas-driven car, doesn't matter. It still has a detrimental effect on social fabric and on a sense of community that can only be held together when you have people sharing space.
Well, thank you, Bill. I think we're out of time, but I want to let people know how to find out more, follow your continuing research. You have a website, lostnewlondon.com, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And it's built upon on a weekly basis. The idea is there's material on the website that you will not find in the book. And my hope is if I have enough anecdotes, enough imagery to perhaps back up those anecdotes or those stories, those narratives, then perhaps there can be a sequel to Lost New London in which we deal with more people, more places that were within this area from State Street north to Hodges Square.
Well, thank you, Bill. And maybe next May people can see you in person presenting more.
Yes. The
and
plan
maybe you can come back here too.
Yes, I would like that very much, Rana.
Well, thank you, Bill. And
My pleasure, and I hope everyone found this interesting and a little food for thought and some humor. So thank you, Rhonda, for this invitation to Thinking Green, and I look forward to another visit where we'll kind of change things, we'll change the focus.
Okay, sounds great.
Hi, this is Laura. Join me and the rest of the